episode, we're excited to welcome Maggie Jackson to the pod. Okay, talk to me about Maggie.
Well, Maggie's become quite famous for her new book, Uncertain. And there were a couple of reasons that we wanted to interview her. One is that she's going to be at the summit this year, so that's super exciting. The other is this is a really important book.
It is.
And it's a really important book in these uncertain times to actually get to grips with different ways of thinking about uncertainty. And so, I mean, I think this is the book's a must read and in our 2024 list. Yep. But Maggie's also thinking more and more about the crossover with AI and both her earlier book, Distracted, and this one now, Uncertain. So getting to know her, how she thinks, what she's working on next, those are all important aspects of the conversation, as well as discussing sort of some of the core scientific findings in the book that she presents in such a sort of helpful, useful, day-to-day kind of way.
Awesome. All right. Hope you enjoy our conversation with Maggie Jackson. Maggie, thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to talk to you today.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be with you both.
Thank you. Let's start with our opening question. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, Uncertain I see it as the end of a trilogy, the third in a trilogy. And my second book was Distracted, and it was about the erosion of attention. And so I was sort of noodling around with the idea that, well, if you have a moment's focus or you somehow, have some kind of attentional capacity recovered in this world, how would you use it? Well, to think well. So I started off on this journey of trying to write a book about what kind of thinking we need in the digital age. And the first chapter was about uncertainty. So, and it's a little more complex. I'm telling the really simplistic story, but basically, I thought uncertainty was something to just eradicate, let's get past that moment of bafflement and put that away, and then we can get into how we think well in the digital age. And I was wrong. It's not just a preface to good thinking. And also, at that moment, I was actually having ironically, a very hard section of my life, a lot of challenges. And I didn't want to go there, frankly. I don't think I've ever said this, but, I didn't want to pick up on all of these signs that the book should be about uncertainty. An editor was saying something, and then I gave a talk and someone gave me a lot of material on uncertainty afterwards, based on the first chapter, but the whole book on thinking really wanted to be about uncertainty. And then the final reason is once I stuck my toe in the water, I discovered this amazing research that was just beginning to emerge after very little focus on uncertainty in certain ways. We've uncertainty is part and parcel of the human condition, et cetera, but there was just a lot of exciting new scientific research that was overturning our misunderstandings about uncertainty. And then finally, I'll just say, this kind of grew out of my interest in technology and its impact on the human condition. So I always felt like the humanists needed to be at the table when we were talking about the future of technology, and as well about uncertainty, which had been predominantly kind of voiced or discussed in economic and business and mathematical terms. And I wanted to do something more.
It so parallels. I mean, I just love the story, because the origin story here, because it sort of so parallels the process that we went through writing Make Better Decisions and understanding how data-driven decision-making was actually being adopted in the world, right? There's this promise of a perfect decision, this promise of uncertainty going away, that it was almost like a design process where you could go divergently to look at all the data in the world and then converge, and there'd be no more uncertainty, and bang, you'd have this perfect decision. And as we went through that process, and brought in complexity, we just saw, whoa, uncertainty is just a feature. and we need to think about it differently. So I think there's just such a rich discussion ahead of us. The thing that, when I was reading your book, the first thing that jumped out at me, though, was the importance of defining it, and the importance of actually saying, this is what uncertainty is, this is what it means in different worlds and different landscapes. And my mental model of uncertainty was actually really different than the way you presented it. So basically, because I'd come at it from sort of a risk complexity perspective, but you'd come at it from a how people perceive it versus how it's defined, and you came up with you had different definitions. You want to walk through those, because I think they're really, I found them really useful and illustrative.
Yes, thank you. Well, great, and I'm glad you asked me why, why I'm choosing this way to define it. I think that's really important. I spend a lot of time, researching, mucking around in a lot of different vocabularies and taxonomies and definitions of uncertainty. Everything from Ellsberg and the Knightian uncertainty that economists know so well, and data-induced scientific uncertainty and what it means in medicine, and etc. But I did find that there was a through line here, as editors would say, that there was a basic, deep, understanding of uncertainty in two major ways, beneath all of the complex kind of definitional arguments. And one is that uncertainty is something we might call the uncertainty, aleatory uncertainty, basically it's called. It's what humans can't know. So I like to give an example, pretty timely these days, of if you have a meteorological prediction of a storm coming your way, you might know quite a bit about likelihood and what might happen and whether you should evacuate, but you don't really know where it will land and what damage it will do. So that's just, some people call it random, but I think it's more than that. The second type of uncertainty that I found, talked about in the bottom line of uncertainty was epistemic, and that's psychological, our response to the unknown as a form of uncertainty. So what we can't know, not what we can't know, but basically, I love the one definition reached by an expert on medical uncertainty, Paul K.J. Hahn, currently of the NIH senior scientist, and he talks about the meta-awareness that you've reached the limits of your knowledge. So it might strike you that you are not sure whether to evacuate from that storm. It could be that you should get out now. It could be that you should stay and protect your home. The epistemic uncertainty is, some argue, just to get a little nerdy about it, that colors everything. Obviously, our perception of the world is part and parcel of both what we know or don't know out there, and then also, our psychological response to the unknown. But putting that aside, I think this double understanding or definition of uncertainty rings true for many, many people. And I also find some, that's heartening, that it really strikes a bell with people. And then the other thing I'd say is that, also jumping off what you were saying about risk assessment, and I would say that we put a lot of, especially in the West, emphasis on aleatory uncertainty. Basically the phrase I'd say is, let's calculate this uncertainty right out of the picture, baby. That kind of is the headline I'd put for the centuries old and very important emphasis on probabilistic reasoning and mathematical modeling, and as Hacking said, the taming of chance. That's allowed us to be, to do so much in society, and yet the epistemic, again, the psychological, or maybe we might even say subjective, or just the meta-awareness that we've reached the limits of our knowledge, that type of uncertainty hasn't been studied until recently as much. And it's really interesting just to consider why. Maybe we can unpack some of those cultural reasons why uncertainty is having its day, and perhaps wasn't as talked about as before.
Well, I think that's really fascinating, and let's do that. But let's go through that a little bit more of the process that what surprised you when you went to this research, and because there's the cultural research, but some of the new neurosciences it has been quite revealing. Some of the and this is such a great work of pulling together this new research.
Yes, and just also before we go there, I'd like to add into the mix of our kind of definitions and how we understand uncertainty. It's really important to note that although I think uncertainty has gotten a bad rap and it's been very, misunderstood, and we need to, further understand our understanding and know how to even utilize our own uncertainty skillfully. It's also important to know that there are what I call guardrails around uncertainty. So, we need answers, we need resolution. So nothing I'm saying and nothing the new science of uncertainty offers, wants anyone to remain in limbo. And along with that, a very important guardrail is to say that we wouldn't want, or we don't want, shouldn't want, as a society or individually, anyone to be in uncertainty about certain conditions, like their survival or the next meal they're coming from. So I've been actually asked if uncertainty is a privilege. I actually see it as a human right. A positive, resilient, skillful, productive approach to uncertainty, I think, is every human's right. And so I just wanted to add that. But I'm the insights from neuroscience and what surprised me as I spent 7+ years writing this book are enormous. I think that there are so many different ways in which we're now beginning to understand your brain on uncertainty. And one point which is really fascinating and interesting is that we as humans are remarkably sensitive to uncertainty. Now, of course, that makes sense. The world is constantly full of surprises and it's not predictable, as we're talking about. But yet the degree of sensitivity is remarkable. We have a brain wave called the N400 that registers the degree of absurdity in language. So if I tell you a very happy war, your brain will actually, by the time I just get to very happy and then move into war, your brain will register that surprise.
You can feel the dissonance,
Yeah,
straight up.
Yes, exactly. It's fascinating. And then even in terms of neurotransmitters and hormones, there's a certain neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, which is related to expected uncertainty. Well, what does that mean? If I'm doing my morning commute and I always know that outside Providence, there's always a tie-up at a certain place, that's expected uncertainty. And so your brain instigates and your body is instigating a certain state to deal with that. Norepinephrine, which we've kind of heard, also related to adrenaline, is released when you have unexpected uncertainty, like, oh, a bridge almost fell down, so the road is closed for 6 months. Not that happens today, but anyhow, so I think this natural talent or innate gifts we have for uncertainty is really important because we can then begin to understand, well, are we retreating from this or cultivating it or shutting it down? And those are really important questions. So the second, and I think one of the most amazing findings from the neuroscience of uncertainty these days, one that I know many, many different people I speak to find actually, surprising and reassuring in a sense, is that the uncertainty response is distinct from the fear response. So just cycling back, I talked about the epistemic uncertainty as being the human response to the world. So when you meet something new, unexpected, or ambiguous, those are sort of the pillars of what triggers your human uncertainty. When you're unsure, in other words, you typically become uneasy, right? I actually give audiences polls, just a really little snap poll at the beginning whether I'm talking to people in a library or to CTOs or what have you, and I ask, what's the one word that comes to mind when I say uncertainty? And 3/4 of the time, it's negative, and invariably the first response is anxiety. And so what I'm saying here is that we conflate the unease of uncertainty with fear, actual fear. And so when we meet up with something new and we grow uneasy, that's actually a stress response that scientists call arousal, and I call wakefulness. So at that moment when you're unsure of what to do in the storm or what have you, your attention is heightened, your brain becomes more receptive to new data, your working memory improves. I mean, I could go on, and it's remarkable. You're being kind of put on your toes. You're actually uncertainty is a signal, and the new situation out there is instigating a stress response, a good stress response that readies you to learn and perform. Now, distinct from that is the fear response, because we do have different stress systems as humans. And when you are fearful, you can flee and you can fight and do all these simple, reactive survival sort of responses, but you are not thinking well. Your higher order cognition is shutting down to focus on, running away or fighting the tiger. So it's really interesting and important, I think. And this is what's burbling up from neuroscience in really wonderful ways, to understand that, hey, when you're uneasy, it's time to, for want of a better expression, lean into that. It's also a signal that the routine has ended, and it's time to update our understanding of the world. And you can see philosophically and psychologically and just humanistically that this is all wrapped up with how we face challenge, how we face change, how we face a dynamic world. And it's not, altogether binary, but I call it a crossroads moment. And I also call it an epic chance. And my agent, actually, in an early draft of the book, wanted me to take out that word epic. And I refused because basically, I think it is an epic chance. You have an expectation and you have knowledge that's setting you up to understand your house or your workday or what have you. It's called predictive processing. Well, when something new or ambiguous occurs, there's a gap between reality and your expectation, and that's called a prediction error, and that's the epic chance that uncertainty offers you to proceed in beneficial and startlingly wonderful positive ways to adapt, to be curious, to etc.
But at the same time, we have these societal pressures, right? Like everybody, you get rewarded when you're the one with the answer, right? So we're always shortcutting to try and come up with a solution, right? We don't want to, as we talk about, and is to wallow in the problem. We don't want to stay in a state of uncertainty, because the reward comes from certainty. The loss of anxiety comes from certainty. Our whole world is based around, spreadsheets and dashboards and everything that are supposed to have the particular answer that you're certain of. I'm curious, when you have these conversations with people and you raise the question, you say 3/4 of the time people put up their hands and they say they're feeling anxious. Like, how do you get them down a path a little bit further to be comfortable with that, or what's your goal in that conversation?
Yes. Well, I think that opening up our minds to the idea that uncertainty is not monolithic, that it is not just one thing. I like to introduce people to the idea that uncertainty, not only the unpredictability, the volatility, the change is woven into the fabric of our lives, but also our ability to be uncertain positively is as well. The daydream is a what if question, which is extremely actually positive for human nature, for creativity. That's uncertainty in action. And, the moment in the operating room when the surgeon pauses and, takes a moment of, harnesses the suspense of uncertainty, the temporal space of uncertainty in order to work through a problem rather than just rushing, applying an old problem. That's uncertainty in action. So I think introducing people to the fact that it's not monolithic, it's not necessarily a disaster, it's not the abyss is really important. And I think that, one thing that's, I'd say it's important to underline is that and it makes sense, it really makes sense, although I don't think we have been thinking like this in our society. If you can be unsure, again, strategically, in a world of change, well, that is actually the best possible course of action. You are more flexible, you are more observant, courtesy of that arousal, you are more able to see nuance. I mean, what uncertainty gives you is nuance, perspective, and possibility. So I think that if the default response is to retreat into certainty or of the closing of your mind for all sorts of various reasons, which is particularly occurs when you're in a hurry or you're indulging in snap judgment and all the sort of, as you mentioned, cultural pressures to do so, that's actually the worst possible way to deal with change. It has its place in our lives, of course, but who wouldn't want to be more adaptable in this current world of change? And I just read a study yesterday that said the average employee now experiences 10 planned enterprise changes, such as a restructuring, 10 in a year versus 2 in 2016, which is just one of many statistics we could find about the rate of change alongside geopolitical and climate and everything else. So it's incredible that we steer clear of uncertainty when that's really what we need now.
Can you in terms of like the change in uncertainty, it's a fascinating statistic. Scary, actually, that 10 major things versus 2. What else do you see as the impact of the digital world in terms of uncertainty?
Yes, well, that's a big question. Yeah, I mean, I think that so maybe scoping large, zooming out, perhaps, or maybe prefacing to technology and digital living, which does have a huge impact on our attitudes toward uncertainty. I think it's also important to note that there are deep historic roots to our, I would say now, allergy to uncertainty. So, first, we have this innate dislike because we evolved to need and want answers, right? So, uncertainty makes us uneasy. It's a challenge. But at the same time, for so many centuries, there has been this effort to eradicate uncertainty, but also to venerate efficiency. I mean, the rationalist view of what is smart is to achieve your goals, no matter what the end. So process doesn't really matter as much as outcome. So there are all these confluences of pressures and influences that steer us away from uncertainty and toward, liking neat, crisp, pat answers. And I think that there was one Columbia study actually that was pretty remarkable vis-a-vis what is a leader, that showed that a leader, both politically or business-wise, who pauses just briefly for a few minutes to examine a new complex problem, underline new complex problem, is rated in videos as less influential. So that's amazing. And another little fun fact is that Hamlet really wasn't seen as a pathetic loser fence sitter until very much into the 20th century. Darwin was not criticized for his long gestation of the origin of species until the mid 20th century. I mean, these are products of this emphasis on efficiency and linearity and instantaneity that are exacerbated, I think, now by the digital. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I find this sort of intersection of this to be like quite fascinating, and there's been so many there has been like lots of studies over time, and I think you reference a few of them about what I would essentially call automation bias, that the technology presents us an answer and we grab it and off we go. How do you think about that in the future with the world of, say, generative AI?
Yes, I mean, I think that the role of automation bias has been pretty, or at least it's a highly proven sort of human response to working alongside, well, let's say, machines or the internet or what have you. All the way back from early industrial technology to automation. The pilots use, et cetera, that people defer to the machine. And that's, I think that while automation bias hasn't been as studied yet in terms of generative AI, there are a few studies that show, just for instance, when it comes to assessing mammograms, radiologists, even who are highly experienced, wind up deferring to the assistant, the AI assistant, most of the time. People will even override their own correct solutions or correct responses to a problem in deference to the machine. And you can also see this in search. Of course, we now have the grand AI overview, which probably have positive effects because that sort of elevated window of information, the first result of the first page of search results is now kind of delivered to us as above and beyond, and so it looks more authoritative. And I've read that it's there's a decline in click-through rates as a result of AI overview, even though it's really, really new. So we can begin to see that what's happened in search might be, we don't know, but might be exacerbated by the role of generative AI, just in terms of our daily searching through information, the research that underlines our lives. And when people search, one study I noted in my book is that when people search, even briefly online for information, they come away thinking they know more than they do. Now, even if they don't find what they were looking for, no useful information, they rate themselves as better able to do well on tests of this kind, the knowledge that they're dealing with, than they really do. It's a kind of hubris. And of course, this is related to the kind of Andy Clark, very, true melding with the intelligence, artificial or, machined intelligence that we live with. And that's a good thing. But when we don't know the difference between what we know and what we don't know, or what it knows and what it doesn't know, because most of the time they're just more search results. You don't know if the machine is just giving you the 30th best response possible or whatnot. So I think that this raises questions of not just automation bias and complacency, habitual complacency in thinking on the part of the human, but also on larger questions about what does it mean to know? And the importance of 360-degree meta-vigilance about the look and feel of knowing. Look at what we see, boxes and I call these templates of another's thoughts. That's what you're seeing online most of the time. As productive as we are, we're operating within the templates of other people's thinking and other intelligences thinking now. So what does it mean to know anymore? And I think that's a question that's very, very, very important to keep in mind as we move forward, unless we just want to hand over all thinking to something which is quote unquote smart, but in certain ways.
I'm not quite sure how to frame the question, so I hope you just roll with me a little bit. So there's sort of this challenge here where you've got an AI system, people are looking at the search overviews or getting an answer out of ChatGPT or Claude, and we've got this developed machine intuition, right? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that for 40 years the computers have been designed like actual physical machines, and that they're supposed to perform exactly as you tell them to. So you put a math equation into Excel, and you're certain that the answer that comes out of that is correct, right? It's going to be able to do the math for you correctly. And you switch over to this new world of AI, which is a probabilistic system, and we're not really good at probabilities. Like humans, we didn't evolve to deal with probabilities. And there's obviously an uncertainty, a level of uncertainty in anything where there's a probability. But every word that comes out of an LLM is based on some level of probability. Every answer that it assembles through its vast data set and finding a vector through to it is based on some level of probability. The data set that it's absorbed is some level. We're all uncertain what's actually in there. And
Right.
now we're in this world of the data that's going into the machines is being generated by machines, sometimes just because it's being generated, and sometimes, there's people who are using machines to create data to influence the machines, to be able to get the answer that they want out of the AI system. All of this feels to me like we're moving into a digital world, which is with another level of ingrained and embedded uncertainty that people don't even understand what to be uncertain about. I'm finding myself in this loop, and I'm not sure how to get out of it. To frame a good question, Helen's looking at me like, "Come on, get it out."
So your question is?
My question, but it feels like I'm not sure how to actually, if the world is presented to us through some form of AI interface, if we're using AI to go get answers for us, I'm not sure how we kind of have to become really comfortable with uncertainty, right? Because everything in that has some level of uncertainty.
Yes, there's that. I mean, the starting point is, yes, we as thinkers it's more imperative than ever that we as thinkers know and understand what uncertainty is and why it's positive, and do not run from it and think it's synonymous with anxiety, and just have a more skillful, as I say, relationship with uncertainty. That's true. That's an eye opener right there. As far as the systems, I don't have any, handy little, line of wisdom that would help us understand what exactly is going on, or how exactly I would say that, as with most major human crises / challenges, we have to move a step at a time. What will happen will be incremental. just like raising a child or just like contending with climate. We have to, know and assess a step at a time. But I think that what you're also perhaps driving at is, well, first of all, the problem is, as you described, extremely urgent and pretty existential. There are so many ways in which the systems can sort of misinterpret, even though the questions seem simple. That's the colossal problem of misalignment. So one study I noted, which was particularly sort of poignant and disturbing, is that when researchers at Duke set up a AI system to indicate with a healthcare organization or insurance company, I can't remember which, to try to assess which patients needed extra care, just extra medical care, they had a program to give them extra attention. And Black patients who received less care, thanks to some systemic injustice and many other reasons, accrue less costs, and so were not flagged as needing extra care. It was only a cost-driven algorithm, and of course that was woefully wrong. And there's so many instances, whether it's racial bias or the way large language models, as you say, are trained and etc. So it's messy, but I think that one of the ways I feel really heartened, but although still concerned about this issue, about this existential uncertainty, is this pursuit of, a rethink of artificial intelligence led by people like Yoshio Benjo up at Mila and Stuart Russell, driving toward designing AI and other systems for uncertainty or with uncertainty. So basically driving back to that rationalist definition of intelligence that I mentioned, the backbone of AI has been, reward-based pursuit of aims, objective achieved, with as little human interference or help as possible. That's what neural networks are set to do. That's where, the AI becomes so astonishing and remarkable and useful through its autonomy. But at the same time, this kind of system is designed to hide the uncertainty that is inherent within the machine. It's not designed to be transparent about the uncertainty. So one wonderful example by the British researcher Julian Howe is that a cop robot working with a human policeman or police person chasing a suspect will, under traditional circumstances, not admit that it's only 70% sure that culprit is guilty, and of course violence can ensue in the name of justice through that misunderstanding. But now dozens of laboratories around the world are actually designing AI robots and models to be transparent about their uncertainty, and also to, most of all, at the bottom line, the most important thing is to be uncertain in their aims, that objective. So by instilling the same kind of probabilistic reasoning that elevated AI, through Judea Pearl's work, we can also now turn the spotlight of uncertainty, or insert uncertainty, I would say, into the system's aims. And then, it becomes A, more transparent, B, more interruptible, more compatible. So that user studies show now, early user studies show that these kind of, what I call the unsure robot, is more, seems more intelligent, but also is able to affect better task performance when working with humans, and is seen as more sensitive. So Is that a panacea? Not at all. I mean, we're going to be one thing that really concerns me is that in a Pew Research study, only 30% of Americans could recognize, when given 6 instances of AI blended into their lives. For instance, one, a Fitbit. Okay, people can recognize that AI is in the Fitbit, but they cannot recognize that AI is actually choosing which email is spam. They can't recognize very, sort of blatant use of AI. Now, when AI is that invisible, so we have the opaqueness of traditional AI, its inability to, its design not to be transparent about uncertainty. But then we also have the other, important parallel problem of when any technology, whether it's the light bulb or the car or AI, the new Genesis AI assistant that's just been released by Google, when it becomes invisible into the fabric of our lives, that's when we take less meta, but also deliberate, intentional, vigilant looks at that. We have to carry, so there's another use of uncertainty. First of all, uncertainty is a form of honesty, I see. Your uncertainty is your admission that the world is changeable, and so are you. And there at the edge of what you know, you don't want to operate as if you are hiding behind a wall of knowledge. It can't be that way. But at the same time, you have to basically understand that, that you have to move forward with an eye toward what you or systems don't know. Now, will we be able to do that in massive ways or omnisciently? No, at all. But we can only become, vigilant and intentional. And Walter Ong, the great literary orality scholar, said you can only know something up close and from a distance, the construal. So it's really important for the artist to walk back from the painting and take a second look. Similarly, I think every day of our lives as we approach AI, consider what it does for you, whether it's doing something that's complete, insufficient, erroneous, and C, considering whether it's adherent to your value system. I think that's what's really important.
There are a couple of things that you mentioned there that I thought that really worth going the next layer on. One is this idea of like what it takes to sort of trigger a sense of uncertainty, and what it would take in an AI to trigger that sense of uncertainty. I remember seeing some research, a couple of different places that found similar things, that when the AI is less certain and less accurate, that it actually triggers the human to step in and think more about the level of uncertainty. So you get the system becomes a better performer when the AI is 80% accurate instead of 90%, for example, because it triggers the human to go, I need to step in here a little bit more. And so it doesn't say we aren't able to step in with that metacognition, with that self-awareness, the limit of our knowledge, but it needs to be something that the AI actually triggers in us. And it could be a probability that's displayed, but most people probably don't really care that much. What are the other affordances that allow us to know that the AI isn't sure? Those kinds of questions bubble up in my mind.
I think it's sort of a question of what are the affordances that we give each other. There's all kinds of words or vocal tones or body language or something else that clues us in when somebody's really certain and when they're, there's all kinds of ways that we communicate that with each other. and there's sort of this there's a gap in terms of the way that we display things digitally, because we're used to digital things that are either it's getting something done, it's a tool that we're using, or I mean the dominant interaction with AI prior to generative AI has always been essentially a recommendation system. This is something that this is a book you might want to buy. This
Well,
is
it's
a
all
movie
pretty-
you might want
but
to
it's
watch.
all-
This is a search thing you might want to click on, and so it doesn't really matter.
Well, no, it's all
You-
pretty low stakes,
well,
right?
it's presented in a way that's obvious that the system isn't certain. It's providing options for you to choose from. But now we've moved into something else that we feel and interpret as certain, because there isn't any, as you say, there isn't any affordance to say what that uncertainty is.
And Stuart Russell's work has been fascinating. I remember reading about it, quite when he put his book out, Compatible, about this idea of the machine needing to be uncertain about the human's goals, because our preferences are emergent and latent and sometimes expressed, sometimes not expressed, and leaving it so that the machine is constantly in this state of a little bit of uncertainty. It's almost like after I read that, I tried to keep my own mind in that space for a while, but it's actually hard to do. It's really difficult to do, because you drive to make sense, you drive to have a yes/no answer, you drive to say, let's just go that way. And for humans, I mean, at least a machine knows how to back down, but it's pretty hard if you've been rewarded for certainty, if you're seen as a leader who's confident, and whether you're humble in that confidence or not is obviously a very important cue to the rest of society. But this overconfidence that tends to come with false certainty seems to be a real problem, because that gets picked up and algorithmically propagated as well, because it's so self-reinforcing.
Right. Well, I think that, I mean, what you've been saying is a lot, and they're all such great points. And, there are multiple different factors, I think, here, perhaps. How can we harness our own innate sensitivity to uncertainty to be skillful in understanding, when AI either should or is uncertain. And that will take design changes. I mean, it will take a rise in the human compatible research push. That it'll have to take off. These are things that are we have to treat uncertainty differently, and so do the designers. And that's really very important. And I'm not saying that's a done deal or an easy thing at all. As well, we're talking about our innate desire, or we are built as humans to engage in predictive processing, to smooth our way through life. We expect that the scene will be as it was, that we know how to make a cup of coffee, or I know where my front door is located. And predictive processing kind of rules the roost, but at the same time, we do have this astonishing ability to have a reality check, prediction error. And I mentioned multiple ways in which we're highly sensitive to picking up on uncertainty. That is, what is new, unexpected, or ambiguous in other people's conversation or in our environment, or etc. So if we can become more positive, that's sort of a weak way to put it, but really in a strong way to become more open and productive and strategic about uncertainty, if we can develop systems to teach uncertainty, whether it's in the boardroom or in preschool, if we can begin to understand these cultural biases we have against uncertainty, and how it's not a passive negative state, but something far more active and dynamic. If we can do that step by step and bit by bit, then I think we will be in a greater position to engage with generative AI in a in a sort of more healthy way for pursuing good information. And one thing I'll throw in there too is that there's a personality trait that has been around since about the mid 1950s, but anyhow is getting a lot of scientific attention now, called tolerance of uncertainty, or intolerance, as you will. This is a tendency, just like whether you're shy or not depends on where you fit. It's not that whether you're shy or not, but where you are on the spectrum of shyness, and it depends on the situation, etc. But some people do have more openness to uncertainty, and others are highly intolerant, and so dislike surprises and are more rigid thinkers, and are more vulnerable to mental disorders such as anxiety. But I think it's really important here because basically, we can change. It's a mutable trait to help us be more tolerant and open to uncertainty. And there are just a tremendous amount of positives related to that. And I think that, that's really an important, thing to think about when we're engaging with technology, whether or not we're more open to uncertainty and therefore more effective in the challenge of uncertainty. So we see it as people who are tolerant see it as a challenge, not as a threat. And so, I mean, again, I'm sort of focusing more on the human side, but I think that there are so many different aspects to how we can move forward with generative AI, and yet not succumb to utter complacency and utter bafflement, I guess.
Yeah, and the machine knows everything. If you
Yes.
a final question from me is, how would you suggest for people that going back to the start of the podcast, separating uncertainty from fear, so that you can have a more functional relationship with uncertainty? Because it does feel like the biggest thing is being able to try and see those two things differently, or acknowledge the experience of them being different, and because fear can be just so overwhelming.
Yes, particularly today, clinical anxiety and even just, our feelings of angst are so top of mind and so common now, and very many younger generations struggle with this. I think that, one of the most concrete suggestions I've found, or strategies I've found that works really well in challenging situations that are, kind of lead to fear, but are ones in which you want to harness uncertainty and perform well. One of the most important things is to dial back on outcome fixation. So what does that mean? Say you are giving a presentation, and it's a tough audience, VIPs or your boss or whatever you are doing. You at that moment might be thinking, how am I doing? Or thinking, I'm not doing so well. Or thinking, gosh, how am I going to be rated at this presentation, etc. You're giving the presentation, and yet you're focusing on the outcome. I mean, that's sort of the royal road to siphoning your cognitive resources directly away from the moment at hand, the process that gets you the good outcome, and also siphoning your resources away from that arousal of uncertainty. That is much more, the outcome fixation is much more connected or correlated with performance anxiety and actually poor performances. So if you see what I mean, you can focus more on the process, what's happening in the room, picking up the attunement that the arousal of uncertainty gives you. Be in the uncertainty, understand you don't know what's going to happen, but you're meeting the moment in a way that focusing on the outcome. And I think that's sort of a metaphor for our culture today. It's all about outcome, and where is the process, even when the process, or because the process involves errors and detours, and there are moments in a presentation when you know you're not giving the perfect answer or doing the right thing, and yet you need to, soldier on with all cylinders firing, and that's what uncertainty really gives you.
Well, there's a hint for Microsoft Copilot right there. There's a design standard.
Oh, I love that. I love that last point. I find my mind sort of interweaving what you're saying to the work we've done, and some of the work we've done in decision making, where there's this challenge that this idea called resulting, where people measure their decisions based on the result, not based on the quality of the decision. And there's something there that's kind of an interesting thing that we could enjoy a conversation when you're with us at the summit. We can dig into this deeper. But this question of sort of the uncertainty is during that process where you're trying to make sense of things and trying to figure out what decision to make. But you're always looking forward to the result, because the result actually provides some level of certainty. Either it went well or it didn't go well, right?
Right.
Exactly. And there's something here that I find to be really interesting.
Oh, you can't control luck.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
Yes, and
awesome.
again, it's so important. Also, what we're talking about is not, hey, I'm just being. Oh, let's accept life as it is. Now, that's important too, but the passivity is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, yes, accepting that life changes and you don't know quite what the next moment will bring and all this sort of thing. But it's also very much of actively broaching, or I see me, and then I see my environment, and there's a sort of boundary here, but maybe mentally there isn't. And yet in that boundary, that space, whether it's between me and the environment, or whether the known and the unknown, how do we want to operate, but fluidly and openly? And that's another reason why it's honesty. Uncertainty is honesty, because you're not sheltering or retreating in certainty, which is really going to, be a loss in the long run. But you are, basically being open to what might come, and ready for it, and then also practicing to, for those unknowns. It's not an abyss. It's not a disaster necessarily. You're practicing by being open to the diversity. And wow, what a way to just be alive.
Yeah. And as you say, that the technology is increasingly at that boundary.
Sure. Well, I love this. Thank you. It's I think uncertainty is this book feels perfectly timed, as a world where we're dealing with massive increase of probabilistic systems, questions over quantum, questions over consciousness and being, whether the observer is what makes it. All of these things.
Do we know anything? Is there truth anymore?
What does it
feel to know?
Grand thing of actually, in order to actually grapple with those big questions, you do have to have a sense of comfort and to find value in uncertainty. You have to, if you just want certainty, none of those really big questions can be approached at all.
Yes.
So,
And
you're frozen in time, as it were.
yeah.
yeah. And only other, I mean, I know we could go on forever, and you can certainly splice anything out, but I think at the root of this book, or how my passion for this topic, is partly to restore faith in the human mind. Because
we need that right now, because we're constantly told that the human mind is about to be surpassed.
Yes, or and AKA that means we're deficient, and AI isn't. But AI is built on narrow conceptions of intelligence. It's a certain form of smart, and I think it's really important. Not that we'll ever really completely concretely know which is better. How do we rate? What's the score? Blah, 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 blah. What it matters is that we go forth understanding that there's a great deal to be faithful. There's a great deal of reason to be confident in human capacities, and being uncertain is one of our human capacities.
Well, it's been wonderful to talk to you. You're uncertain as on our inaugural Artificiality book awards for 2024, and I know we made an exception because it is actually 2023, but we had to pull it in because it's a very personal book in terms of reconceptualizing this. So thank you very much for writing
thank you
it.
for the book, and thank you for taking time to talk to us. We're excited. Thank you.
Oh, it's so wonderful to talk with you as always, and thank you. I'm really honored by the award.
So stay.